And a good Monday morning to everyone. A good Monday, Easter Monday morning to everyone. And lift your cup and let us drink a toast, shall we say, to the new day, the new dawning of Easter Monday. I try not to slurp that much when I drink anything, but it's hot. It's hot. So welcome to everybody on this beautiful Easter Monday. It is a cloudy day. It started, if you saw the video of the sunrise, it started very, very cloudy. But with a kind of exciting movement of the clouds. Now the clouds are lightening up a bit. And while I don't have direct sunlight coming on me, there is a fair amount of light coming through the window. I'm actually sitting at my desk, which is facing east. And if there were no clouds, I would have to have the blinds drawn a little bit so that the direct sunlight wouldn't be blinding me. But I do hope that as with me, I have to say, I do hope that the sun is shining in your heart. It definitely is in my heart, and I'm very, very grateful for this day. I'll talk about a few other reasons to be grateful for the day, but I actually started the day in a rather delightful way while I was praying this morning and exercising. Praying and exercising seems to be the one multitask activity that I tend to manage to do okay, which is interesting. But I was listening to this. That is the beginning of the Easter Oratorio, the Easter Oratorio by Johann Sebastian Bach. It's not as well known as some of the other things that he did, but it is a marvelous, marvelous piece with lots of trumpets and a very wonderful, joyful spirit. When I finish this video, I will put a link to the YouTube video of this oratorio. It might be worth listening to today. The course of the oratorio, it's not that long, it's a half hour or so, but the oratorio basically has various pieces featuring chorus, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, that tell of that event on Easter morning when the two apostles, John, the beloved disciple, and Peter run to the tomb, and Mary Magdalene and the other Marys are independently going to the tomb, and it's kind of interesting, their discovery of the empty tomb and their reactions to it. And what is most interesting is the women, very naturally, are chiding the men, who always think they are so superior to the women. They're chiding the men for their lack of faith, for their anxious hearts, and the kind of despair that they feel, where the women are actually seeing hope through this empty tomb. So it's an interesting oratorio. It's in German. Don't pretend that I understand German. I don't, but I was able to find the the text for the oratorio also online, and I'll try to remember to publish, to post that. But like I say, it may be a good thing to listen to for a few minutes today, maybe as part of the background while you're doing something else, maybe help you to focus in prayer on this day. Let's face it, Easter this year in particular, is right in the middle of what is a very challenging time. And now I'm going to, so I'm not distracted by it, and so you're not distracted by it, I am going to fade out this Easter oratorio. Okay. Yep, Easter Monday, during a difficult and challenging time, I woke up to a couple of things, including one realization this morning. I looked on the calendar, and the last Mass, the very last Mass that we celebrated here at Nazareth House in our chapel was 4 weeks ago today. 4 weeks ago today was the last Mass that we celebrated publicly here. Unfortunately, we were not able, and have not been able, to celebrate, let's say, a Mass before a video camera that broadcasts to all of the residents. Nobody ever set up a closed-circuit television network here for the residents. I think that's sad. I think, quite honestly, I think that was a lack of foresight, because so many other places do have, within an institution this size, do have an immediate way of communicating with residents through a closed-circuit television network that would be available as one of their cable channels in their rooms. Sadly, we don't have that. I hope that will be, if any Sisters of Nazareth or the administration are listening at all to this, I do hope that will be one of the projects in the future, to be able to share. In fact, it would be so nice, wouldn't it, to be able to share these morning coffee chats widely among the residents. As it is, they have to have FaceTime, or they have to have internet connectivity, and not too many people in their 80s and 90s are adept with even the possibilities of using this electronic media. I mean, there are several priests here who absolutely refuse to use email. There are a number of people here for whom email, even if they have all of their faculties, shall we say, still, all that newfangled technology stuff, it's all bunk. Well, okay. But it would be good if we could have at least a way of plugging into a closed-circuit TV network here at Nazareth House. I think that would have been a marvelous investment that would have paid off immensely now if they had done that in the past. So I hope that they learn their lesson now and do that for future communication and the ability to be in touch. As it is, broadcasting the Mass from here, because the Wi-Fi connectivity is very spotty here among these buildings too, it would not be reliable even for me to set up my iPhone as I'm doing now, basically, even to set up my iPhone or or a laptop computer to be able to record the Mass and send it out here. We're just not quite there yet. That's beyond even my capabilities as the quote techie priest, as I'm sometimes known as. Anyway, 1 month that we have had to look elsewhere for the kind of spiritual nourishment that we took for granted in the celebration of daily Eucharist. And that has meant nourishment from God's Word in a variety of ways. That has meant nourishment from the virtual presence of the Mass. Most parishes, I don't know about most, what the numerical percentage is, but a very great many parishes, even small parishes, are live streaming, often over Facebook or YouTube, sometimes from more sophisticated live stream sources, but are live streaming their daily Mass that the priests are celebrating to a, shall we say, a virtual congregation. What is interesting is this. I've looked at some of them online and looked at the number of people who are watching. And almost all the time, there are more people watching those Masses than were coming to church even in the best of times. St. Bernadette's Parish, for example, where my friend Deacon Jim Carper is the parish life director, and I was celebrating Mass there when he had difficulty finding a priest. I know very well about how many people come to Mass there, and it's not many. I would say at most, in a church that seats 1,000 people, at most, the highest population Mass would be 200 or less. And there were 175 people watching on one of the days. I think it was Good Friday when I watched it, which was probably more people watching that Good Friday service from St. Bernadette's live streamed or available later on YouTube than actually would have come to Mass or would have come to the Good Friday service. And I think that we are possibly experiencing that in some ways, not being able to gather at something that we so much took for granted was our right, that we could sort of behave a little bit cavalierly. Yeah, Mass, it's always going to be there. It's always going to be there. So, well, if I miss it this time, that won't be so bad. So, and now we are hungering for it. Now we are seeking it out where we can find it. And of course, the style of celebration, the way that a priest or a deacon or a layperson leading some kind of prayer online, including say the Liturgy of the Word, becomes so much more important. Whether or not a preacher or a prayer is able to convey a deep sense of union with Christ, union with His Word, union with Scriptures, becomes very, very important when there is I have to say, an unforgiving video camera facing him or her. The depth of our own personal spirituality and how it shines forth becomes very important. I think that's maybe a good thing. It may be a good thing that you and me, we who are depending a lot on social media, on the way that things are come to us on the tiny screens of our phones or the medium-sized screens of our computers, or even if you have Apple TV or Roku or whatever the various TV connectors to enable you to see computerized stuff on the big screen of your TV, where somebody may have bought a huge screen TV in order to watch the Super Bowl, for God's sake, and now is using that big screen TV to watch the Holy Father celebrating the Triduum ceremonies, or celebrating Mass every morning, or or your local priest, or another sort of creative bringing forth of the Word of God, like perhaps my humble coffee chats, coffee with Father Tom in the morning. If it weren't for this COVID virus, I would have never done this. But I have a suspicion that I'm probably going to continue it long after we are beginning to be able to have more and more social interactions, and maybe on a limited basis, staying perhaps 6 feet apart and wearing face masks and not touching our faces, as I just did. And washing our hands before and after, maybe during. When we can begin to open up our churches again and come to rediscover what in the past we had been taking so much for granted. Wow. I do think that I'm going to probably be continuing this and hopefully reflecting in a hopefully helpful way the experience of the rebirth of faith from challenges. I think we have tremendous opportunities here. There was two things that I got through the email this morning that led me to think about this more deeply. One was an email from a let me see now, where is it? No, that wasn't it. Oh, come now. Yes, here it is. Chris Brackett at Fresh Expressions US. Fresh Expressions is, and I love that word, Fresh Expressions, that phrase. It is a social media site that carries live webinars and resources for Christians. It's not denominational, but it's very Catholic with a small c. And it says, something happened yesterday. So the email was this morning. And it says, Thomas. Now I know that is a computer-generated greeting. I know that Chris was not sitting there at his computer writing my name on this particular email. Just like those of you who are on my list, I say, dear whoever you are, but at 2 a.m. in the morning, or 1:15 midnight actually, I'm not sitting at my computer typing your name into an email. Sorry about that. I hope I'm not disillusioning anybody. But he writes, I am no statistician, nor have I read any reports, but I believe something happened yesterday that we cannot overlook. On April 12th, 2020, it is highly likely that more people heard the good news of the resurrection of Jesus from the dead than on any other single day in the history of the world. Think about it. Since that very first Easter, there's been no single day where more people were presented with the essential message of the Christian story, that Jesus Christ is risen. The beauty of this reality is underscored by the fact that the gospel was held forth to untold multitudes by the Big C Church. There were Catholics, Protestants, Orthodox, Pentecostals, and those who don't fit into any of those big categories. Yes, there were big churches, small churches, high churches, and low churches. Yesterday was historic. Now, why was it historic? Because they were making use of the technological media that God has enabled us to develop, and made use of that to spread the word widely. How did St. Paul spread the word? He made use of the technology of that day, which was Roman roads and ships carrying commerce, carrying merchandise, carrying things. There were no passenger, no ships or caravans devoted simply to passengers. You had to hitch a ride on those ships that were taking wine and oil and grain and cloth and other goods from one place to another in order to... That was a technology of that day. And Paul knew how to make use of it. He knew how to make use of the Roman roads. That map that you see right there, that is a map of the Roman Empire in the 1st century. What is fascinating about that map is it shows in considerable detail, but not, it's not, each country is not huge on it, but it shows in considerable detail the Roman roads, the system of roads in the 1st century that were built by the Romans. Why were they built by the Romans? So that their armies could get from one place to another in case some kind of trouble or some kind of defense was needed. Fine. But they were there and generally were available to usually not individuals. Traveling as an individual was not safe. Paul never traveled alone. It might seem that way when we read the Acts of the Apostles, but he never traveled alone. But would always be little groups in a pair, or more often than not, there would be kind of a retinue there. It was much safer if you had a number of people. The robbers who were everywhere, they needed the small defenseless traveler in order to exploit them. Those who were had a number of fairly strong-looking people along with them would probably be less prey, shall we say, less attractive prey to the robbers. And anyway, Paul used the technology of his day. How did he write his letters? He didn't sit down at a candlelit table in the middle of the night in a cave or something and write with a quill pen. He dictated, which is why Paul's letters are sometimes so very hard to read, just like the transcription of any talk, including what I'm saying, would be hard to read because there's all kinds of digressions. Paul did a lot of the same kind of stuff I did. He gets on a train of thought and then it's derailed onto a siding. And that's the way it was. Paul dictated to secretaries. He may have had difficulty writing. I might get into that at another time because his hands may have been crippled and deformed because of the rigors of his occupation. Remember what his occupation was? Tent making. What do you have to do? You have to thread a a leather thong through a small hole pulled by a needle in canvas or more likely in leather. That's not an easy thing to do. And that took its toll on his hands. So that's why he dictated. So anyway, that's another aside. But how did Paul's letters get saved? They got saved because somebody saw, hey, wow, there is something good here, and let's share it with the church next door. Now, next door might be the other city 20 miles upstream that Paul or his disciples also evangelized, but let's share it with them. So a copyist would try to get it accurate. You know how difficult that is sometimes to be sure that you're copying something accurately. And then they'd send it with a courier. And, over time, sort of like coronavirus spreads, these letters of Paul became kind of contagious. They spread because people saw them as good things. All of that process was inspired by the Holy Spirit. But that's why those letters were preserved to become what we now know as the foundation of the New Testament canon. Just a little aside, I can't resist here. Paul's letters are the foundation of the New Testament, not the Gospels. Why do I say that? Because by the time the first Gospel was written, which would be Mark, somewhere around 70 A.D., Paul had already been dead somewhere between 5 and 8 years. By the time the last Gospel was written, John, between 90 and 100, Paul had already been dead for 40 or more years. So Paul finished all of his writings before the first Gospel was even written. Now, there were oral stories, there were even written texts that are now lost, but formed the basis for those Gospels, yes. But one of the things we don't often think about, and I'll probably talk about this sometime later in the future, no time now, but by the time the Gospels were written down and were made available to larger communities than just this particular church with this particular apostle or disciple of the apostle telling these stories, by the time those were written down, Paul's letters were already a part of the universal life of the church. So the Gospels were written down by people in situations where Paul's writings were already familiar. It's a very interesting thought, isn't it? Paul, not the Gospels, is really the foundation of the New Testament message, the good news that we find in the New Testament. Yeah, at some point I'll talk more about that. So, what is this letter, which I got from Fresh Expressions, basically saying? Because of the technology of our day, yesterday on Easter Sunday, more people heard the Word of God, the good news that Jesus Christ is raised from the dead. More people heard that than on any other single day in 2,000 years of Christian history. I think that's something really to think about. Now, the other thing that I got in the mail today, email, was an email from, I'm sure Frank won't mind my saying this, but from Frank Carlin. Frank Carlin, a very good friend who was one of the pilgrims he and his wife Anna were on a pilgrimage some years back. I forget exactly which year. 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. That's all fading into ancient history, isn't it, Frank? At any rate, he has done something that just warmed the cockles of my heart. He sent the my last letter, which I wrote for Easter Sunday, I've got a 300 subscriber mailing list. I think probably many of you are on it. If not, the information to get on it is available. It'll be available in the notes and comments. But he sent that to, I don't know how many friends. I haven't read the whole thing, but he copied me on all of them. He forwarded that letter together with an introduction to how he knows me and what he thinks of what I am doing. And because I will probably blush if I were to read any of that, I'm not going to read it, but I may make it available in another one of my social media platforms, so look for it. I don't think Frank will mind, but you know, if you like what I'm doing, if you think that this is a good thing, well, then share it. There's an image that I heard in a workshop one time that said, do you know what the most effective means of evangelization is? And we kind of like to think, well, teaching, preaching, telling people, you know, formally the gospel and all of that. And they said, it's gossip. It's gossip. How so? I mean, even Pope Francis has railed against malicious gossip right from the start. That's one of the things that tears us apart, tears the church apart, is gossip. So how can gossip be the means of evangelization? Well, think about why you gossip. You gossip because you have something in your mind or heart, for better or worse, that is too good not to share. And all too often, that thing that we think is too good not to share is something that actually tears down somebody else. Did you hear about so-and-so and what they did last night? Blah, 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 blah. You know, all that kind of stuff. Why do we share that? Because, well, it's good. It's delightful. It makes us feel good to share it. Now, supposing you were as on fire with an awareness of the love of Jesus Christ for you and for the world, supposing you were as on fire with that as you often are with what that person did last night. And, ooh, this is just too good not to share. Now, so if we could take that spirit of feeling that, understanding that the good news of Jesus Christ is such good news for me that I can't shut up about it. I can't not share it. To a certain extent, I think that may be why you're seeing me here right now, is that, if I look at it, that is my motivation here. Can that become your motivation? It's not to share my stuff. It is to share Jesus Christ. And if you find something is helping you in your relationship with Jesus Christ, share that. I have often thought another image of evangelization is infection. We know, even though the vast majority of people living in our country, in our city, in our world, are not sick with the coronavirus, are not going to die from COVID-19, the vast majority of people are not sick with it. But the problem is, and the reason for all of this quarantining, is that potentially it can catch on like wildfire. that what one day is 1,000 people, the next day is 2,000, the next day is 4,000, the next day is 8,000, the next day is 16,000, the next day is 32,000, next day is 64,000, and then 128,000, and within the span of a few days, what is few can become many. Supposing we were as infectious with our enthusiasm for the good news of Jesus Christ as the coronavirus is enthusiastic about getting from my system to yours. That's the nature of infection. Can we gossip the good news? Can we see the good news as something infectious? That we are confident that we want to share joy. What's one of the biggest problems of sharing the good news, evangelization, is that so many of us don't act like it's good news. We act more like it's a duty. We act like it's a burden. We act like it's something that we gotta do. How much are we motivated in our religious practice by the fear of hell or the fear of something bad happening? I've gone 36 minutes and 26 seconds, so I think that's enough, more than enough for one day. So on this day, I just wish you the joy of the sun that, at least here in Palms, California, is beginning to come out. There are patches of blue. May the risen Lord continue to dispel the clouds in your own hearts, in your own lives, in our world. So God bless you all. Please pray for me. I pray for you. Pray for all of us that we may continue to discover new ways of making the good news of Jesus' resurrection, his new life, to become our new life. God bless you. Have a wonderful day.